Donald Gregory James. You had a 35-year career at NASA, and your latest position was as the agency's Associate Administrator for Education. And now, after retirement, you just wrote a book called Manners Will Take You Where Brains and Money Won't. Wisdom from Mama and 35 years at NASA. Donald Gregory James, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you very, very much, Mr. Guillot. I appreciate it, and I'm delighted to be on your program.
So, I saw your CV is very amazing. And of course, to get in NASA, even as a janitor, you have to be a spectacular person. So I'm just so delighted to have a little bit of background information on how does this whole apparatus work and how does anyone can just get in there in whatever position there is. So how about if we start with your background? Where do you grow up? What were your ambitions when you were a teenager? Hello. Oh,
United States. And I always had a fascination for airplanes. And the reason is that our house was right next to an airport. And my father used to take us in the car and we would sit on the side of the road and we'd watch airplanes. So I always loved airplanes. And then later, my father decided he wanted to work in Africa. And so we got on a big airplane and we went there. And so I just had this fascination. So when I grew up, I wanted to be a pilot. I wanted to fly airplanes. And I got very excited when I learned that the United States was going to work on a supersonic airplane, like the Concorde. And that's what I wanted to work on. And so that's what I ended up pursuing when I went into college. But unfortunately, the United States decided it wasn't going to work on the supersonic airplane anymore. And it was after, when I was in college, the Apollo program ended. And so I got uninterested in that. And I decided after a year of studying aerospace engineering to switch to my other passion, which was international economic development, because I had the privilege of living in many third world countries, and I saw the problems of third world countries. So I wanted to help with that. But I learned when I got into graduate school that I felt like, well, what am I going to do for a job and how am I going to get work? And so somebody told me about this internship program that was designed for graduate students to work in the US government. And I applied and I was very successful. But unfortunately, I couldn't find a position in an agency to help me work with the problems of development. But out of the blue, I got an invitation to interview at NASA. And I was really curious, like, why would NASA want to interview me? And I guess they dug into my CV and found out that I studied engineering when I was in college. And my dad, I was living with my dad at the time, he said, you should take the interview. So I took the interview and they accepted me. But I decided that I was only going to use the few years at NASA to get experience to go do what I really wanted to do. So that was in 1982. But in 1986, my whole life changed because something unfortunately really bad happened in 1986 at NASA. And people who are familiar with NASA's history know that that's when the Space Shuttle Challenger exploded, killing all of the astronauts. And I had the good fortune of being asked by the head of NASA Education to participate in activities after the Challenger accident. You remember we had the teacher on the space shuttle. And there were a lot of people who were grieving about the loss of the teacher and a lot of students who were watching in the classrooms, I know all over the world, and they saw the space shuttle explode. And so I was asked to work with the backup astronaut to Krista McAuliffe. Her name was Barbara Morgan, and to assist her around the country as she gave talks. And that experience showed me that NASA had a big appeal to a lot of people and inspired a lot of students. And I made a decision right then that I was going to make a career out of NASA. And I went on up eventually to be in charge of all of NASA education. So, in many ways, I got lucky. I got into an intern program that gave me access to NASA. We still have intern programs. In fact, I managed many of them. You can go to intern.nasa.gov and find out about how to get internships. And there's other ways of getting in as well. But for me, that was my trajectory, and it was a very, very enjoyable career.
And since I get the feeling that you had um, good studying ethics, that you had academic achievements, and I wonder how you developed that studying ethics.
So I attribute a lot of my uh, capabilities to my mother. My mother was a teacher. She was a French and English teacher. So of course I had to study French in school, which
Tu
is
parles
not very good.
français?
Uh, Pas mal,
Pas mal.
mais c'est
Okay.
not very good.
Okay,
It's
let's
been
continue in English.
yeah, I am ashamed that I haven't kept up my French because it's a beautiful language, but I had a mother who helped me a lot. Well,
Okay.
that's a long time ago. um, so she taught me the importance of what I write about in the book about a lot of mannerisms that are really helpful in life that I took for granted. Uh, and it was more than just about being polite. It's things about being prompt. It's being courteous to people, having empathy. There's a lot of values that I took for granted. And I think that when I got into NASA, two things happened. One is I learned the value of training, continuing to train myself to develop my skills and abilities. So I did a lot of training in NASA. And I also took the lessons from my mother, which I discovered was helpful in my career. And I write about in the book about how I know that I had opportunities that other people didn't have because even though I wasn't the smartest guy, and I really wasn't, I was a B student. I didn't get, fantastic SAT scores. I did okay. I mean, I was smart enough to do the job, but what I'm saying is I didn't go to Harvard and get straight A's and all of that. I was a good average student. Um, but I also knew how to navigate the world of an office and deal with people for the most part. I wasn't always great at it. I did some things that were, I wish I could take back, and it's judgment is very important. So to me, it was a constant process of training and cultivating that skill. And that's really the message of the book. And that is manners, broadly speaking, is a skill that you can develop that I think, as my mother says, will take you further than your brains, how smart you are, and for sure, how much money you have. I mean, let's face it, there are a lot of smart people who are in prisons, right? They're not stupid, but they do stupid things. There are also a lot of rich people who are very unhappy. They are not, money can't buy them happiness, and we know this very well. So I believe that the key to having a meaningful and fulfilling career in any discipline is our ability to cultivate our manner, which is how we present ourselves in the world. And that's a big effort.
So your definition of manners is how we present ourselves in the world, or is there anything more other than that to the definition of having good manners?
Yes. So it includes what we say and how we say it. It includes how we appear. It includes our gestures. It includes our body language. You may know, and I'm sure your listeners know, that most communication between people is nonverbal communication, right? So it's important to be aware of this. And I had to learn the hard way sometimes that how I held my body and how I positioned my body was important. I fortunately was able to live in different countries growing up. So I learned in different cultures that where you position your body with respect to other people is something you have to pay attention to. So it's more than just etiquette. It's more than just politeness. I mean, I've met people who are very, very polite, but they also don't sound very genuine to me or authentic. I feel like they went to polite school to learn to say the right things, but I don't think that when they go home and talk to their family that that's what they're like. So authenticity, genuineness are very important ingredients to our manners. And so I think all of this is learnable, that you can learn how to do this, and that's what I attempted to do.
So you said it's a skill. How do we learn how we develop manners? I mean, so many of us come from societies. I tell you, when I was a little kid, I used to hang out with the wrong crowd. Okay,
Yeah,
so
yeah,
we were getting drunk, and
yeah,
some of the guys were burping, others were
yeah,
farting, and it was
yeah,
all funny. You know, it was like
yeah,
a men's paradise where we could just say and behave and do whatever we wanted to.
yeah.
And that was my environment for many, many, many years.
Right.
So I had to go through a process to get rid of these quote unquote bad manners and develop a new set of manners. Can you share how does a person change from bad manners to better manners?
Well, that's great. And you actually gave the perfect answer for the beginning, Alan. You made a decision that you were going to work on your manners. And a lot of things in life that we want begins with a decision. Now let's think about that. Our decisions start in our head, right? It starts in our head. I decide that I'm going to lose weight, or I'm going to learn French, or I'm going to do whatever. What happens after decisions are the choices we make, right? Now it's still in my head. I decide I want to learn French. The choice, am I going to study Babel? Am I going to move to Paris? Am I going to have a friend on the internet? There's a lot of choices, right, that I have. It's after you made your choices and you start taking actions that manners comes into play. So let's take manners for an example. If you decide you want to work on your manners, you have choices that you can make. One of the choices that I suggest that people make is to think about the people that are in their lives. You said so yourself, that you were aware of the fact that you were around people who did things that you concluded later probably wasn't going to help you get to where you wanted to be. Wherever that is, doesn't matter where that is, but you knew that something was missing. So the choices that we have to make often is, I need to have better people in my life. I have a whole chapter in my book called Who is on Your Team? Who is on your team? I'll give you a specific example that I write about. My sport growing up was tennis. I loved playing tennis. I played at a club where I grew up in California, and I got frustrated after a while because I felt like I wasn't improving. And I talked to the tennis instructor, and he asked me, he said, well, who are you playing against? And I told him all the people I was playing against. And he said, well, how do those games turn out? I said, well, I usually win. Sometimes it's a draw, but I just don't feel like I'm making an improvement, because the better players, they didn't want to play with me because they didn't think I was at their level. And he said, well, that's your problem. And I said, what? He said, you need to play against the better tennis players. If you want to get better at tennis, you have to play with people who are better than you. You have to get your butt whooped on the tennis court and learn some hard lessons. So that was a big wake-up call for me, that if I wanted to get better at anything, I had to be around people that were like what I wanted to be and that were better at it. So if you want to improve your manners, you need to be around people that you look up to and say, wow, that person has great manners. They know how to carry themselves. They don't get They don't get mad or excited when the littlest things happen. They don't dwell on problems. They deal with challenges and then they move forward. They know how to have rapport with other people. How do they do that? How do they do that? So I talk about having people in your life that you give permission to talk to you about where you may be falling short in your manners. Now, here is where it gets tricky. Most of us have people in our lives who are our friends, and these friends generally aren't going to tell us the truth about things about ourselves because they don't want to risk the relationship, right? They don't want to say, Alon, you know what? I think part of the problem with you is you have bad breath, and that's why you not getting any girlfriends or whatever it is. They might say, well, it's their fault or whatever. Maybe some friends might tell you that, but they're not telling you that in a very compassionate way. You have to have people in your life that you give permission to tell you things about yourself that you may not want to hear. Now, here is an illustration for what I mean, because it's a difficult concept. Every day, I am convinced that everybody who's listening to this sees themselves in the mirror all the time and they don't think anything of it. They brush their teeth, they get out of the shower or whatever. But show everybody a photograph of them naked, and what happens to most of us? We freak out. We're like, oh my God, what is that, right? Because we are seeing ourselves in the eyes of somebody else, of the camera as somebody took it, so we're blinded. It's called our blind spots. We don't see things that other people can see. And a lot of people know this. And so when I was going through my career, I was aware, I knew people who weren't progressing in their career because there was something about their personality. There was something about their attitude. There was something about the way they carried themselves, and nobody bothered to tell them. I'm telling you, as a NASA professional, I know astronauts today who will never fly in space. And it's not because they're not capable or not smart enough. It's because they don't have good manners and they never learned it, and people don't want to work with them. I know this. I will never out them. It's not the point. I know an astronaut who flew once. They flew once. And the team on the spaceship did not like the person. They had problems through the training. That person never flew again.
Wow.
So this is what I'm talking about. They're perfectly capable of doing the job, but there was something about their manner that people, and when you're in space and you're working with a team of people, you have to be able to get along because mistakes in space are deadly. You can lose a life as a result of that. So I think it's important to have to cultivate a group of people. You don't have to have them all together at the same time. And in the book, I have an illustration from the sources of where you can get a team. There's your family, there's your friends, there's your professional networks, there's experts, and there's even higher power. If you believe in a higher power, you can have that on your team, right? But you have to ask people and saying, Alon, I need your support. I need help. I don't know why I'm not progressing in my career. And you have to have somebody willing to tell you a truth that you may not be willing to hear. And that is what I got. And that is how I was able to be successful.
Wow. And okay, so how do you just mentioned a minute ago that some people, their manners is as if they went to politeness school.
Yeah.
And in a way, let's say a simple word as the word please. You
Yeah.
could say please to someone, and just by the accent, it could sound like an order, or it could have sound like a polite request.
Yes.
So in many people, their manners are not quote unquote authentic. They like that authenticity of
Yes.
the word and the true feeling of the person being equivalent.
Yes.
How let's say I went to politeness school and I
Yeah,
say please at the proper places, but my please, the way that I express it is not authentic. It doesn't come across as a real request.
yeah,
How do I develop that empathy of even though I'm saying the right things, I'm not saying it in the right way?
yeah. That's really the ultimate challenge, is how to develop that, because it's not about the words you say. It's really about what's in your heart. Is it true in your heart? Because if it's not true in your heart, it's not going to be true in your head, and it's not going to be true coming out of your mouth, right? So it's about awareness. I've developed a heightened degree of awareness when I'm around people, and I try not to be so automatic in my response. Sometimes it's taking a deep breath before you respond. Um, Here's one exercise that I suggest people do to kind of get at what you were talking about. The next time you're in a conversation with multiple people, just decide for a moment that you're just going to pay attention to the dynamics of the conversation. Just watch it. Who says what? Did somebody interrupt? Did somebody build on somebody else's point? Where does it go? Just be an observer. You can talk, but be an observer of your own self. And you learn things about human nature, about what really is going on for people. Sometimes, I developed the capability that later in my career, where I can walk into a room of a meeting and I can tell instantly that there's a problem. But if I walk in there and I said, okay, people, let's go, let's start talking about the budget today, and I can sense that there's something going on. If you're a leader and you can't address that authentically by stopping and saying, it feels like there's an issue going on here and I'm not sure what it is. Maybe it's just me, but can you help me?
Right.
So that's being authentic, because it's uncomfortable, right? It's a little, but that's what's true for me, right? I'm being truthful. So if I go to politeness school and I learn the right terminology, but I don't learn the the way in which it needs to be delivered, it can come off as phony. I give you one quick example. I took a business trip to Atlanta, Georgia. Now, Atlanta, Georgia is in the south of the United States, and it's well known for being where a lot of politeness and civility starts. My mother is actually from Atlanta. And I go to the hotel, and there was the man who greeted me at the door of the hotel. And oh, he was so nice. Hello, Mr. James. It's so nice to see you. Thank you so much for coming to be with us at the Marriott today. May I please take your bag, sir? And he went on and on and on. And I looked at this young man. He was probably about, I don't know, 28 years old. And at one point, I said to myself, is this guy really like this all the time? Is he like this around his friends? Because I'm willing to bet that when he's not on stage acting polite, that he is who he is. You see, that's the person that I want.
Mm.
See, I appreciate that he learned his words and he learned the right things to say. He probably went to training school. They probably taught him to say, sir. But when I hear it and I know that that doesn't feel like who he really is, there's a disconnect. There's a gap between who he really is as an individual and what he was trained to say. And I call that gap phoniness or inauthenticity. Now, I don't say it's deliberate. I don't think he's deliberately trying to be phony, but I don't feel connected to him like a human being, right? Um, so it's hard. I mean, I had the opposite example when I was as associate administrator. I used to go to a lot of science fairs, And I tell this story in the book about this young man that at a science fair I went up to. I was walking around with other people in my staff, and we were looking at the science projects. And I approached this one table, and this kid was there, and he stood up and he looked at me and he said, "Hi, Mr. James. My name is Gabriel. And my friend Jose and I are really delighted that you came to our table, and we're excited to tell you about our science experiment." And he went on for a while. And then after a while, I stopped him and I said, "Wait a minute. How old are you?" And he said, "I'm 11. I'm telling you, I would have hired him over a lot of other people that day if I could hire him, but he was too young to be an intern." He was genuine. He stuck out his hand. He didn't wait for me to talk to him. He looked me in the eye. He started talking about his experiment. Then he stopped talking. He said, "Do you have any questions?" And I said, "No, go ahead." And then he proceeded to talk. So he had presence. I was so impressed with this guy. I said, "Gabriel, are your parents here by any chance?" He goes, "Yes, sir. They're over there, waiting for me to be finished." I said, "Excuse me a minute." And I went over to his parents and I said, "I don't know what you did to raise your son, but you did an awesome job. If I could hire him tomorrow, I would, because I can teach him the technical skills he needs to know to do it well at NASA. But it's impossible to teach him the manner skills that he obviously shows." That's the difference that I'm talking about.
Okay, Donald, I feel like nowadays we are more and more isolated. We are spend our days just doing this
Yeah,
all day long on our phones. We are uh, spending our time in social media. We don't talk to each other, and we can only develop manners by having this face-to-face human interaction. We don't even develop it through Zoom meetings or get-togethers. Of course, we are in the COVID-19 era right now. It's hard to have interaction, but assuming a world without COVID, uh, and how do we get people off their butt, of their Netflix, of their social media, and to have this face-to-face interaction so that we can develop our manners in a way that can help us and help the other individuals around us?
it's a fantastic question. And, I wrote this book pre-COVID. I finished it before all the lockdown. After the lockdown, it was all about editing and polishing. In fact, at the last minute, I added a prologue to the book to talk about COVID and asking myself, is anything that I write about still relevant? Because this is how we're interacting, right? By Zoom and things like that. I started thinking maybe I should work on some supplements to the book and put it on the website as I think about, what you said, because it's absolutely right. Um, I do believe the principles still apply. Number one, I think we are going to extricate ourselves from having to only interact online. We can legally interact in person if we practice our social distancing and our masking. But I think there's many other aspects of manners that are applicable. I give lots of talks to students, and sometimes I'm looking at the screen, and there's several students on the screen, and I'm looking at the screen, and while I'm talking, I have students and I'm holding up my iPhone and I'm texting. I see that they're texting, or they're eating their breakfast, or whatever, and so what they're not doing is they're not fully engaged with what I have to say. Now, in all fairness, it really is hard, particularly as an older person. I'm 63 years old, and I come from a different era, to know how to engage with younger people in a way that really captures their attention. And this is an unusual situation, and they're in an unusual situation. So I'm not saying it's they just need to change. I'm just making an observation about what I'm seeing. I think for adults, it's something that, you can work on. Like, I talk about the difference between paying attention versus giving attention, and I make a distinction. that giving is an act of love and an act of of respect for somebody. You know, I give you my attention because I respect the fact that we are in the space together, and there's something that you are sharing with me and I'm sharing with you, and together we're going to get better at that. But you know, I notice things, and I tell this one story that my father, at the end of his life, he wanted to live in the Philippines, and he was over there, and then he got deathly sick, and so I flew back to be with him, and he was in a coma. Anyway, he passed away, and so we had a little mass for him, you know, with his caregivers and everything, and I'm standing in this room with this pastor who didn't really know my father. In fact, at one point he had to stop and ask me what was his name when he was doing something. I thought that was funny. But in the middle of all of this, somebody's cell phone rang, and my first reaction was, okay, I know people forget to turn their cell phones off in church, and you know, but the woman took the call in Tagalog and proceeded to have a conversation while I'm looking at my dead dad in a casket, listening to this pastor who didn't remember my father's name, and I was, I didn't know what to think. I thought, well, maybe in this culture it's okay to talk during a funeral, right? Because I know when I go into a place of worship, I don't even take my cell phone in with me. I leave it in the car, and I say, you know, if God wants me, she'll send for me. I just hope it's not a one-way summons, right? So I don't I don't understand that, you know, and I would say that's very, very bad manners, is disrespectful. I've been in meetings. I've been in, you know, meetings with people that, you know, they look at their cell phones, and I had a hard time when I was a leader with some of my staff wondering whether or not, you know, they were paying attention. And one time I got frustrated. I got so mad. I said, look, it looks like most of you are paying attention to your iPads and cell phones and not what we're discussing. And it was a little embarrassing, because what half the people told me is that they were taking notes on their iPads. And one lady said she was finishing her presentation for the next presentation in my meeting. And I don't know whether or not they were texting with other people, and I know sometimes they do, but it's difficult. But for me personally, I like to pay attention. I like to give attention. When I'm on the phone with you, Alan, I'm not doing anything else. Even here, and you're in Canada, I sit down on the chair and I'm talking to you. My wife, she's doing three other things while she's on the phone, right? She's texting, she's making dinner, she's doing whatever she's doing. I can't do that. And I can't do it because, one, I'm not good at it. And number two, I just come from, if I'm with somebody, whether it's on the phone or whether it's on the Zoom, I want to be with them 100%. I want to give my attention to them as an act of courtesy, as an act of respect, and as an act of love. And I say that's manners.
Wow. Okay. Uh, mm, in the book, you mentioned what was the inspiration for you to write the book. You mentioned you were giving a presentation and a student
Yeah.
asked you something. Can you tell us the story of why you got inspired to not only at that moment to develop more your answer, but you know the whole process of sitting down and writing a whole book is just a big challenge.
Right. So I retired in March of 2017, and the chief scientist at NASA, where I worked, invited me to come back the next summer to give a talk to summer students. NASA always has summer students working for it, and since that's what a program that I ran, I was happy to do it. And he wanted me to focus on my career and you know, things of that nature. And during the question and answer session, this one young man raised his hand and said, well, Mr. James, if you could go back in time and talk to your 25-year-old self, knowing what you know now, what would you advise him? And I thanked him for the great question. And I said, that's a wonderful question. I know that what I would tell him is, you really have to cultivate and work on your manners, because you will do well you will do well. It took me a while to, I think, really fine tune my manners later in my career, but I would have avoided some mistakes that I made. And I think that I would have had been able to have a bigger impact. And so I told him that. The other thing I told him is that I would advise Donald that when you hear about companies called Google and Apple, buy as much stock as you possibly can. They got a big kick out of that because, wouldn't that have been wonderful? I remember when both of those companies went public and, I never thought anything of it, but I would be a multimillionaire if I had given myself that advice.
Well,
But
your
after,
your
yeah,
advice about having good manners is still valid today. If people follow that advice, they can have a better life and maybe have more money as well.
yeah. So the book really is a longer version to that answer. It's just, I hope I can find him and say, here's the longer version of the answer. But that's why I wrote the book. I felt like I learned some things, and it was my duty after I retired. I had been helped so much in my life by people who cared about me. I felt it was my duty to give back. And my goal is to give to students and early career professionals some things that I learned. And I'm not saying that it's everything. You have to pick and choose what works for you. If it doesn't resonate, great, then you'll hear some fun NASA stories. But I think there's something in there for everybody that they just pick one thing that they can work on. I'm pretty confident they'll do well.
Well, Donald Gregory James, can you tell us one more time the title of your book? In fact, if you don't mind, I see it behind you. Can you grab it and just show it to the
Yeah, hang
camera?
on.
And
Yes, this is the very first print copy of the book, before it's published, and it's called "Manners Will Take You Where Brains and Money Won't." Wisdom from Mama and 35 years at NASA. And you can pre-order it right now on Amazon. Just Google "Manners Will Take You Where Brains and Money Won't," and you'll find it on Amazon. And it comes out February 2nd. And
and
I'm so excited.
where can people follow you? Because I saw you have a nice website as well.
Yes, my website is actually on being changed as we speak to reflect the book. But it's my full name, DonaldGregoryJames.com, DonaldGregoryJames.com. And the website is live now, and you can read about the book and the blogs. But we're in the process of changing it to put the book on there, and that should be out in a few weeks. So I'm very excited about it.
Mr. James, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you, Alan. I appreciate it. I'm just grateful for the time here, and I wish you the very, very best.